Welcome back to the channel. I'm Owen Garner, and today I'm going to be talking to you about why I think that recasting never works. So for me, when an actor's recast, it just completely takes me out of the moment. An actor being recast, they could end up with a completely different look, completely different sound. They might even act completely differently. For me, it's just incredibly jarring, takes me out of the moment, especially when watching films in a marathon, which is what we love to do here on the channel. It completely spoils the flow of a film. For me, I can't suspend my disbelief in the way that I can with the rest of a movie. I mean, imagine how disconcerting it would be if in the middle of this video, I were to be recast. So in this video, I'm going to be talking to you about why recasting happens, about the very few occasions on which I think it could be said to work, and what I think that studios should do instead. So why does it happen? Well, one of the reasons is that an actor might be unavailable. So in these cases, sometimes it's seen that their character is needed to tell the story in the next film, but from a studio side, getting the right or same actor back isn't viewed as necessary. Now, when you have this as what they're doing because the character is in the background and, you might just not notice, I don't think that shows a great confidence in the character that they have. One of the examples where this has happened and we didn't even notice is in the Thor movies. So Thor's gang, the Warriors 3, one of those is recast from film to film and you didn't even notice. Now this isn't a glowing example of how a recast has worked. No, it's actually you didn't notice because the character was so boring in the first place. And that is not a good thing. When they're relying on us not realizing that a character has a completely different face because they were written so badly in the first place, that doesn't say that a recast in this sense works. So the most inescapable reason that an actor might be recast is that the actor has died. So this is obviously in the real world a tragedy, but sometimes a studio is tied in to including a character. So for example, if they're adapting already existing material, which we're seeing more and more in Hollywood. So one big example of this is in the Harry Potter films. The actor Richard Harris, who was playing Dumbledore in the first 2 movies, died before they went on to film the subsequent 6. Now, obviously in this example, they had to include Dumbledore because he's in all of the books. So they brought in Michael Gambon to play the character. Now for me, why this didn't really work is that Michael Gambon's portrayal of Dumbledore is so different to that of Harris's. What I would suggest would be write in a new character, have a new headmaster of Hogwarts, but obviously for here, they're adapting the books, so they had to include Dumbledore. But as I say, Harris's performance is very muted, quite mellow, and Gambon's is a bit more eccentric. So when you're watching it in a marathon, they just feel like very different characters. It feels like a new set of films. Now, sometimes studios have reanimated deceased actors and brought them posthumously to return to their roles. And we're seeing this in Star Wars, with Carrie Fisher being edited in as Leia with footage that they'd shot on previous movies, and Grand Moff Tarkin, a very important character in the original Star Wars movie. For me, this just never works, really. Not only does it forge a path straight down the uncanny valley, it also just makes you uncomfortable as you spend the whole time feeling bad about the actor not having control over their image after their death. And as George Miller, the director of the Mad Max movies, said in a recent interview, you don't look at the performance, you look at the effect. So he was asked would they consider doing de-aging technology with Charlize Theron for the new Furiosa movie, but instead they decided to recast. So another reason that an actor might be recast is that they didn't agree on the contract. Now, this rather skillful way of negotiating yourself out of work usually happens when an actor views themselves as essential, so tries to levy their importance or self-reported importance to get more money for the next picture that they're going to return. So the most famous example of this would be Terrence Howard in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He levied his importance trying to get more money for the next movie, but the studio said, no, we're all right actually, and the role was recast, leaving him with rather famous last words of,
next time, baby.
But not only does this mean that he's out of the picture, but it means that they then have to explain why Rhodey is different. So Don Cheadle would go on to replace Terrence Howard, and his first scene, he comes in and he has to do the,
"Look, it's me, I'm here, deal with it, let's move on."
Now for me, that isn't like a clever workaround, a wink and a nod. I'm taken out of the film. I'm just looking at that. Oh, how are they going to deal with this? What are they going to do? Oh, that's what they've said. Yeah, okay. Staying on the Marvel track for a moment, I'll talk about another reason that recasting doesn't work and a reason that it happens. Now, it is similar to not agreeing on the contract, but there is a distinction to be made. So this is when an actor is difficult to work with. Basically, difficult to work with or creative differences, a euphemism for they're a nightmare. So in Marvel, again in 2008, we had The Incredible Hulk, where Edward Norton played the titular character. Now, it's reported that Norton was very difficult to work with on set. He was demanding, he wanted things changed, and yeah, he was replaced because the studio thought it's not worth it. And at that point, they knew that they were going to have the character for a long time. So moving forward, they wanted someone more agreeable. So Norton was out and Mark Ruffalo was in. So yeah, Mark Ruffalo's far more agreeable, he's easier to work with, and he would just sort of do what he's told, really. But as a viewer, you're sort of watching this and it takes you out. The Incredible Hulk, you could just sideline and attribute to some falsehood, a sort of unreliable narrator's mistelling of the truth. And even in the modern MCU, we've seen an episode of What If, where they retold the events of The Incredible Hulk, but with Mark Ruffalo's likeness as the Hulk. So in that sense, you could go, oh yeah, it's just in the past, all those things happened, but things looked slightly different. But saying that casting not being held up as gospel would be fine if others weren't. So we've seen other actors return in their roles back in the MCU proper. So we saw William Hurt's Thaddeus Ross return in Captain America Civil War and then appear again in Infinity War, Endgame and Black Widow. And we've seen Tim Roth's Emil Blonsky in Shang-Chi and She-Hulk. And we're also going to get even more characters returning. So we're going to get Tim Blake Nelson, Samuel Stearns, aka the leader, in the new Captain America movie. Liv Tyler as Betty Ross is going to return. And, you know, so we've got some examples where the casting is gospel. That's as it happened. That's their face throughout the multiverse. That's what they look like. And some instances where it isn't. And for me, I just spend my time thinking, okay, well, what is the rule on this? Where is the line? Where is it drawn? So for me, yeah, it just takes me out of it. So if we look at the example of The Incredible Hulk, that film came out in 2008. We jump 10 years to 2018, and we have Mark Ruffalo now in the role of Hulk. William Hurt is back as Thunderbolt Ross, and Robert Downey Jr. is Iron Man. Now, he appeared in a post-credit scene in the 2008 Hulk movie, but the post-credit scene was actually put before the end of the film because the studio clearly didn't have great confidence in people staying to watch until after the credits. So there's those through lines there, but Mark Ruffalo now. If we look 10 years into the future to a potential World War Hulk movie coming out in 2028, where would we be? Well, would we have multiple Hulks? So would Edward Norton return? Would we still have Mark Ruffalo and maybe even past Hulks? Would we see Lou Ferrigno? Robert Downey Jr. wouldn't be there for obvious reasons, or maybe he would in this Marvel universe of ever diminishing stakes. But if Thunderbolt Ross was going to be there, it wouldn't be played by William Hurt, as that actor has now sadly passed away. That role is being recast with Harrison Ford, who will also be in the new Captain America movie. So when we look at that, and you're told that all of these films are connected, it is quite jarring if you watch them next to each other. Now, I'm hypothesizing with this future movie, but we are moving in the direction of, okay, well, what are we getting next? Who is who? And in this multiverse, we sort of can finagle things, but sometimes it is different. So I spend a lot of time focusing on that element. So when does it work? Well, one example where a recast could be said to work is a prequel. Now, I maybe feel like I'm reaching there in the interest of balance, because I don't know if we would call a prequel a recast necessarily. You might have in one film, for example, an actor portraying the role as the main chunk of the movie, but we're showing them at different points in their life, and they have a child actor playing them as a child and an older actor playing them as an old person. And you wouldn't say that that was recasting. The best actor in the world couldn't play themselves as a baby. And no, Hollywood, that is not a challenge. Yeah, so when you get to these points where an actor, you're aging them up or aging them down, you could potentially stray into the Steve Buscemi, hello fellow kids, and that kind of territory is not where you want to go. So with a prequel, you have to have a different actor. If somebody has portrayed a character at one point in time, that actor then follows the linear path of the progression of time. So couldn't in 5 years play themselves at a point 5 years in the past, because that just wouldn't work. So we bring in a new actor. So that's how you get a new actor for a prequel. Another example where recasting could be said to be excusable is a legacy sequel. Now, one example here would be in the Mad Max movies. So Mel Gibson played the titular role in the first 3 movies coming out in 1979, 1983, and 1985. So when Mad Max Fury Road rolled around in 2015, they brought in a new actor. So Tom Hardy became the titular role. Now, even within these movies, the sort of timeline isn't fully cemented. Max is sometimes viewed as more of a mythic character. It could be said that each different film is actually a different man, with all of their legends attributed to this one impossible figure of Max, the road warrior. So maybe to make this new film, George Miller just wanted a younger actor to come in and play his action man, or maybe he just wanted to get rid of Mel Gibson. But in this film, it does work, but there is also, as I say, an argument to be made that it isn't actually, within the logic of this film, what is upholding it. It's not the recast that works, it's that the films themselves stand outside of this obsession with continuity. Now, one example where recasting could be said to work is where a character is heavily made up or is even computer generated. So, for example, in Star Wars, a character like Darth Maul, who in the original film, in The Phantom Menace, appeared portrayed by the stunt performer Ray Park, but the voice was provided by Peter Serafinowicz. In subsequent roles in animated shows has been voiced by Sam Witwer. Now, if they were to bring back Darth Maul proper into live action and had him in scenes in action, I personally would like to see Sam Witwer, who for me has been the voice of Darth Maul for the past, I think, 10 years at least, maybe even more, in the Clone Wars and Rebels, and has the ability to do the physicality. So for me, that is where that recast could actually be said to work. Now, I've talked about it here a bit, I've touched on the multiverse kind of stuff, and that's a time where recasting could be said to work. Now, what we've actually seen though so far isn't really recasting and more reboots. So if we look at Spider-Man, for example, people would say, oh right, it was Tobey Maguire, then recast as Andrew Garfield, then recast as Tom Holland. Now, while in a sense, yes, that is what happened, the role of Spider-Man carried over, but the films themselves were separate. It was, okay, a new Spider-Man, but next to a new Gwen Stacy, next to a new Norman Osborn, next to a new... So in that sense, it wasn't really a recast. And then we see them all brought together in No Way Home. So that, yeah, okay, it kind of could be said that, oh, it's working in that way. But we haven't yet seen where a recast is in-universe played into. Now, they could do this in the upcoming Deadpool movie, for example. They could bring back in Terrence Howard and have him play across characters who he had been with in his first movie, and also other characters who we didn't see him interact with, but the character of Rhodey would go on to know, and you could have that played into and have a bit of a wink and a nod to the camera and have that kind of not work, but also kind of work. But we haven't really seen that happen yet. So what should they do instead? Well, one very simple and oft-used solution is to just write another character. If you need a father figure for a character to offer them sage advice, just write in an uncle or a past teacher or, somebody else that fulfills that role. If they're there just to drive on the plot, they're a bit of character progression. They have 2 or 3 scenes where they'll offer guidance and then it'll come back in at the last second. I mean, Hollywood has enough old white guys for us to not recast a role, just bring in a different kind of character. And then, there's a fun challenge. For me, creatively, when there are things that you can't do, that's when exciting things happen. Because when you're hemmed in, limitation is a great driver of creativity. You have to do something else. So if this actor isn't going to return and you can't have that character, write a similar character that has a similar role, but give them a different angle, do something differently. So if the reason that you have to recast is because an actor isn't available, you could just wait. So an example of where this happened, which actually uses both of these solutions, is in the James Bond films, specifically Pierce Brosnan's. So in Brosnan's first outing in GoldenEye, Michael Kitchen played Tanner, his chief of staff, the intel man. Now, Michael Kitchen couldn't return for Brosnan's second outing, Tomorrow Never Dies, so a new character was written into the script with Colin Salmon playing a character who basically was a sort of interim chief of staff. And then for the third film, Kitchen was able to return to the role of Tanner, so he was back in, and Colin Salmon's character was still there, but you had this consistency of, okay, we have Bond, he's on a mission, we need someone to tell him what to do, here it is. And then you look at Felix Leiter in the Bond films. Now, what really takes you out of it is when, for one Bond, they have multiple Felix Leiters. I think Sean Connery had about 6 Felix Leiters. And from an audience perspective, it's very confusing because you see the characters on screen greeting an old friend who we're told that we should recognize, but they have a completely different face and they act completely differently. They're a completely different age. And that is something that they've done before. One Felix Leiter appeared for 2 different Bonds and appeared at his wedding, and it was an old friend, and that just really is confusing if you're watching in a marathon especially. Now luckily in James Bond this trend has been bucked, with Jeffrey Wright appearing as Felix Leiter in 3 of Daniel Craig's films. So he was Daniel Craig's Felix Leiter. Another fix is just to get the right person in the first place, and that's a very easy thing to say and not as easy a thing to do. But if you know that you're planning on making multiple films with a person, then there are different things that you need to consider. To be morbid, if you want them in 5 films, consider their age, consider when they want to retire. If you are choosing someone that is going to be the center of your universe, don't make it somebody that's going to be difficult to work with. Try and always find the right person. But again, that's talking with hindsight. So, in conclusion, there are lots of reasons that an actor might be recast, from being unavailable to not agreeing on contracts. But for me, what bothers me is that recasting never seems to be driven from a creative standpoint and usually sits basically just in the interest of putting more money in the pockets of the Hollywood fat cats. But is it a modern trend or sickness that we seem so obsessed with this continuity of having the same character? I mean, we're already suspending our disbelief in films so much. Bond jumps off the crashing train, adjusts his jacket and makes a quip, seemingly to himself, and all of this without crumpling his tuxedo or breaking a sweat. But that's what the film wants us to suspend our disbelief on, not that Bond's greatest ally, his longest friend, completely changes face from his perspective a week or a year maybe, but in our perspective 2 minutes, because you finish watching one film and start watching the next, and then this new character is here, but they're not a new character because they're a character you've met before. So for me, yeah, it just always doesn't work. So there are instances in which recasting could be said to work, and in cases where it couldn't, there are workarounds, but Hollywood always seems to learn the wrong lessons. For example, blaming the failure of Solo on Alden Ehrenreich's re-portrayal of Han Solo being recast as a younger version of a character previously portrayed by Harrison Ford. That was blamed as what went wrong there, that's what audiences didn't like, and not the fact that the studio buried the movie against its other film that it was releasing that summer, Infinity War, which was obviously going to diminish the returns of that film. For me, I feel that recasting just never works, but with Hollywood being what it is, I fear there are a few more that I'll have to contend with. Well, thank you for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe. I've been Owen Garner for the Movie Marathon Men.